On a quiet Sunday morning in March 1998, 12-year-old Sarah Chen spotted something impossible in the back pew of her grandmother's small church on Chicago's South Side. Michael Jordan, the most confident man in America, the basketball player who seemed invincible on every court, was sitting completely still. He wasn't singing. He wasn't clapping. He wasn't even moving. He was crying. What happened next would shock the sports world, change one community forever, and reveal a truth about greatness that no one saw coming. This is the story of how the greatest basketball player who ever lived discovered something more important than winning. It started with a little girl who wasn't afraid to ask a simple question: "Are you okay?" Sarah Chen pressed her nose against the cool window of her grandmother's old Buick. The streets of Chicago's South Side rolled past like scenes from a movie she'd seen before, but never really watched. Rows of brick houses stood shoulder to shoulder. Some had fresh paint and tiny gardens. Others had broken windows and empty lots where houses used to be. "We're almost there, sweetheart," Grandma Betty said from the driver's seat. Her small hands gripped the steering wheel tight. "Mount Sinai has been my church home for 40 years. You're going to love Pastor Williams." Sarah wasn't so sure. She was 12 years old and visiting from California for spring break. Back home in San Jose, her family didn't go to church much. Her parents were always too busy with work. But Grandma Betty had rules, and Sunday morning church was rule number one. "Do I have to sit still the whole time?" Sarah asked. "Just be respectful," her grandmother said with a gentle smile. "Sometimes the best thing we can do is listen." They parked on 47th Street next to a red brick building with tall windows and white steps leading big wooden doors. A sign out front read Mount Sinai Baptist Church, founded 1924. All welcome. People were walking up the steps in their Sunday best. Families with children. Elderly couples holding hands. Teenagers in suits that looked like they belonged to their older brothers. Everyone seemed to know each other. They hugged and laughed and asked about kids and grandkids. Sarah felt out of place in her simple blue dress. These people belonged here. She was just visiting. Inside, the church was smaller than she expected, but somehow felt huge. Wooden pews stretched from the back wall to a stage up front. Tall windows let in streams of golden morning light. The walls were painted cream color and decorated with pictures of Jesus and African-American church leaders she didn't recognize. "Come on," Grandma Betty whispered. "I always sit in the same spot." They walked halfway down the aisle to a pew on the right side. Sarah slid in next to her grandmother and looked around. The church was filling up fast. She counted about 200 people, maybe more. Mrs. Gladys Washington, an older lady with silver hair and gentle hands, sat down at the piano. She began playing a slow, beautiful melody that seemed to float through the air, like a warm hug. The church choir stood up and started singing. Their voices blended together in perfect harmony. Sarah found herself relaxing for the first time all morning. There was something peaceful about this place. Safe. Like nothing bad could happen here. That's when she saw him. In the very last pew, sitting alone, was a man who looked familiar. He was tall, really tall, and wearing a simple black suit with a baseball cap pulled down low over his face. Something about the way he sat made Sarah stare. Most people in church were swaying gently to the music or singing along. Some clapped their hands softly. Children whispered to their parents. Everyone seemed connected to what was happening. But the man in the back row sat perfectly still. His hands were folded in his lap. His head was slightly bowed. He didn't sing. He didn't clap. He didn't even seem to be breathing. Sarah squinted to get a better look. The man's profile was sharp and strong. His shoulders were broad. Even sitting down, she could tell he was probably the tallest person in the church. Then it hit her like a lightning bolt. She knew that face. She'd seen it on TV 1,000 times, on posters in her friends' bedrooms, on basketball cards and cereal boxes and commercials. Michael Jordan was sitting in her grandmother's church. Sarah's mouth dropped open. She grabbed her grandmother's arm and whispered as quietly as she could, "Grandma, that's..." "Shh," Grandma Betty said without looking back. "We're in God's house." But Sarah couldn't stop staring. Michael Jordan, the greatest basketball player who ever lived, was 20 feet away from her. The man who could fly through the air and make impossible shots look easy. The superstar who lived in a mansion and drove fancy cars and had his own line of sneakers. What was he doing in a small church on the south side of Chicago? And why did he look so sad? As Sarah watched, she noticed something that made her heart skip. A tear was rolling down Michael Jordan's cheek. Then another. His powerful hands, the same hands that could grip a basketball like it was glued there, were shaking slightly. The choir finished their song and everyone sat down. Pastor Williams, a kind-looking man in his 50s, stepped up to the wooden podium at the front of the church. "Good morning, Mount Sinai family," he said in a warm voice that filled every corner of the sanctuary. "Good morning, Pastor," the congregation replied together. "Before we begin today's service, let's take a moment to remember those who are struggling. Our brother Marcus Thompson is still looking for work after the factory closed. Sister Patterson's grandson is serving overseas. Mother Jefferson is recovering from surgery." People nodded and murmured amen and yes, Lord. Sarah noticed how everyone seemed to know about each other's problems, like they were all part of one big family. Pastor Williams continued with announcements and prayer requests. Through it all, Sarah kept glancing back at Michael Jordan. He never moved, never participated, never even looked up. When it was time for the offering, people walked to the front and placed money in a wooden box. Some put in coins. Others folded dollar bills. A few wrote checks. Everyone gave what they could. Michael Jordan reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his wallet. Sarah watched as he took out what looked like several $100 bills, but instead of walking to the front like everyone else, he just held the money in his hands and stared at it. After a long moment, he put the money back in his wallet and closed his eyes. More tears streamed down his face. Sarah was confused. Why would the richest athlete in the world be upset about giving money to a church? He could buy the whole building if he wanted to. During the sermon, Pastor Williams talked about carrying heavy loads. "Sometimes life gives us burdens that feel too heavy to bear alone," he said, "but we don't have to carry them by ourselves. That's what family is for. That's what community is for. That's what faith is for." He told a story about a man who tried to move a huge rock by himself. He pushed and strained but couldn't budge it. Finally, his neighbors came to help. Together, they moved the rock easily. The rock didn't get lighter, Pastor Williams explained, but the load got shared. Sarah saw Michael Jordan's shoulders shake slightly, like he was crying harder but trying not to show it. When the service ended, people stood up slowly and started talking to their friends and neighbors. Children ran around between the pews. The old ladies hugged each other and made plans for dinner. But Michael Jordan didn't move. He sat in his pew with his head in his hands, completely still. Sarah watched as people filed out of the church. Some walked right past him without noticing. Others glanced his way but didn't want to bother him. A few seemed to recognize him but respected his privacy. Finally, the church was almost empty. Just Sarah and her grandmother, Michael Jordan, and a handful of other people cleaning up or talking quietly. That's when Sarah made a decision that would change everything. She stood up and started walking toward the back of the church. "Sarah," her grandmother whispered. "Where are you going?" "He needs help, Grandma," Sarah said simply. "You taught me we should help people who are hurting." As she got closer to the last pew, Sarah could see that Michael Jordan was still crying. His expensive suit was wrinkled. His famous hands were trembling. The most confident man in America looked completely lost. Sarah stopped at the end of his pew and cleared her throat softly. "Excuse me," she said. Michael Jordan looked up, and Sarah saw something in his eyes she'd never seen in any of his interviews or commercials. Fear, sadness, and something else that looked like he was drowning and couldn't find the surface. "Are you okay?" she asked. For a moment he just stared at her. Then in a voice so quiet she almost couldn't hear it, Michael Jordan said the words that would begin the most important week of his life. "I don't know." Sarah stared at Michael Jordan for a long moment. The most famous athlete in the world had just told a 12-year-old girl that he didn't know if he was okay. His voice was so quiet and broken that it made her heart hurt. "Sometimes I don't know either," Sarah said softly. She sat down in the pew next to her without asking permission. "My mom says that's normal." Jordan wiped his eyes with the back of his hand and looked at this brave little girl who had decided to sit with a stranger. "What's your name?" "Sarah Chen. That's my grandma over there." She pointed to where Grandma Betty was pretending to organize her purse while keeping one eye on them. She's been coming to this church for 40 years. Sarah, Jordan repeated. That's a pretty name. Are you really Michael Jordan? She asked. He nodded slowly. Yeah, I am. But right now I don't feel much like him. Sarah didn't understand what that meant, but she could tell he was in pain. Do you want to talk about what's wrong? Sometimes talking helps. Jordan looked around the church. Most people had left, but Pastor Williams was still there, quietly straightening chairs and picking up programs. Grandma Betty had moved closer but was giving them space. It's complicated, Jordan said. I'm smart for my age, Sarah replied. My teachers say so. Despite everything, Jordan almost smiled. This kid had no idea who he was supposed to be. She just saw someone who needed help and decided to offer it. When was the last time anyone had treated him like a regular person? Can I tell you something, Sarah? Jordan asked. Sure. Everyone thinks being famous means you have everything figured out, but sometimes it just means more people are watching when you mess up. Sarah nodded like she understood, even though she didn't really. My dad says everyone messes up sometimes. Even grown-ups. Your dad sounds smart. They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes. The afternoon sun was streaming through the church windows, painting everything in warm golden light. It was peaceful here. Safe. I should probably go, Jordan said finally. Your grandmother is probably wondering what's taking so long. Will you come back? Sarah asked. Jordan looked surprised. To church? Yeah, you look like you need to be around nice people. Everyone here is really nice. I don't know if I belong here, Jordan said honestly. Grandma Betty says church is for people who need help, not people who have it all figured out. So I think you belong here just fine. 2 weeks earlier, February, Michael Jordan's penthouse apartment overlooked Lake Michigan from the 30th floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows showed a view that real estate agents called priceless. On clear days, he could see all the way to Michigan. Tonight, the lake was dark and choppy, matching his mood. The apartment was perfect in every way. Marble floors, expensive furniture, artwork that cost more than most people made in a year. Everything was exactly where his interior designer had placed it. Nothing was out of place. Jordan sat at his kitchen table, still wearing his Bulls uniform from that night's game. They'd beaten the Lakers by 20 points. He'd scored 38 points and made the winning shot with 12 seconds left. The crowd had gone crazy. His teammates had celebrated. The reporters had called it another masterpiece. But now, alone in his perfect apartment, Jordan felt empty. On the table in front of him were 3 things that told the story of his life. His Olympic gold bauble from the 1992 Dream Team sat in its velvet box. Next to it was a faded photograph of his father, James Jordan, taken the summer before he was murdered in 1993, and beside that was a letter that had arrived that morning. The letter was written in careful handwriting on notebook paper. At the top, someone had drawn a small basketball with a smiley face. Dear Mr. Jordan, my name is Maria Santos, and I live in Phoenix, Arizona. I am writing to you about my son Diego. He is 8 years old and loves basketball more than anything in the world. He watches every Bulls game on TV and practices your moves in our driveway every day. Diego has leukemia. The doctors say he is very sick and might not get better. His biggest dream is to meet you. He talks about you all the time and says you are his hero. I know you must get many letters like this. I know you are very busy. But if there is any way you could meet Diego, even for just a few minutes, it would mean everything to him. He just wants to tell you how much you mean to him. Thank you for reading this. Win or lose, you make my son happy every time he watches you play. Sincerely, Maria Santos. Jordan had read the letter 5 times. His assistant usually handled fan mail, but something about this one had gotten through to him. Maybe it was the careful handwriting. Maybe it was the drawing of the smiling basketball. Maybe it was the way the mother asked for so little. Just a few minutes. He picked up his phone to call his assistant. They could arrange a visit to Phoenix. It would be good publicity too. The team's marketing department would love it. But when he dialed Phoenix Children's Hospital to arrange the visit, the nurse who answered gave him news that hit him like a punch to the stomach. Diego Santos? The nurse said. Oh, that sweet boy. I'm so sorry, but Diego passed away 3 days ago. The family held his funeral yesterday. Jordan dropped the phone. 3 days ago. While he was scoring 45 points against the Knicks and barely thinking about anything except the game. While he was signing autographs after the game and smiling for cameras. While he was at dinner with friends laughing and having a good time. Diego Santos had died. Jordan walked to his window and looked out at the dark lake. How many letters like this did he get? How many sick children wrote to him hoping for just a few minutes of his time? His assistant sorted through hundreds of requests every week. Most of them never reached him. How many Diego Santos were there? He thought about the gold medal sitting on his table. In 1992, he was part of the greatest basketball team ever assembled, the Dream Team. They'd won easily and brought home Olympic gold for America. It had been one of the proudest moments of his life. But what did it mean now? What did any of it mean? He thought about his father, who had been murdered by two teenagers trying to rob him. James Jordan had been sleeping in his car on the side of a highway. He'd pulled over because he was tired and wanted to rest safely. Instead, he'd been killed for a few dollars in a car. All of Jordan's money and fame hadn't been able to protect his father. All of his success couldn't bring him back. And all of his talent couldn't save 8-year-old boys from cancer. So what was the point? Jordan walked back to the kitchen table and picked up the letter again. At the bottom, in a child's handwriting, Diego had added a note. Mr. Jordan, thank you for making basketball fun. Even when I'm sick, watching you play makes me smile. You are the best ever. Jordan sat down and put his head in his hands. For the first time in years, Michael Jordan, the man who never showed weakness, who never backed down from any challenge, who the whole world saw as invincible, began to cry. He cried for Diego Santos, who died dreaming of meeting his hero. He cried for his father, who would never see another championship. He cried for all the letters he'd never answered and all the people he'd never helped. Most of all, he cried because he felt completely alone. Outside his window, Chicago slept peacefully. Millions of people were in their homes, living their lives, facing their own struggles. But inside his perfect apartment, surrounded by all the rewards of success, Jordan had never felt more isolated. He looked at his reflection in the dark window. Still young at 35, still strong, still at the top of his game. But inside, he felt like something important was missing. Something that all the championships and money and fame couldn't give him. Purpose, connection, peace. The phone rang, making him jump. It was his mother, Dolores Jordan, calling from North Carolina. Michael? I saw the game tonight. You played beautifully. Thanks, Mom, he said, trying to keep his voice steady. Are you okay, baby? You sound upset. Jordan almost told her about the letter. About Diego Santos. About how empty he felt despite having everything. But he stopped himself. His mother had enough to worry about. I'm fine, Mom. Just tired. You sure? You know you can talk to me about anything. I know. I love you too, son. Get some rest. After he hung up, Jordan sat in the darkness for a long time. Tomorrow there would be practice, then another game, then another city, another crowd, another performance. But tonight, in the silence of his perfect life, Michael Jordan made a decision that would change everything. He was going to find what he was looking for, even if he didn't know what it was yet. The next Sunday morning, Michael Jordan drove through Chicago's North Side looking for something he couldn't name. He'd borrowed his trainer's beat-up Honda Civic and wore a Bulls baseball cap pulled down low. The last thing he wanted was to be recognized. His first stop was St. Matthew's Lutheran Church on Lincoln Avenue. It was a big brick building with tall spires and beautiful stained glass windows. The parking lot was full of expensive cars, BMWs, Mercedes, and Lexuses. Well-dressed families walked up the stone steps in their Sunday finest. Jordan slipped into the back row just as the service started. The church was impressive inside. High ceilings, fancy decorations, and a huge organ that filled the sanctuary with powerful music. The pastor wore expensive robes and spoke with a smooth, confident voice. But something felt wrong to Jordan. The people around him seemed more interested in being seen than in listening. During prayers, he noticed several business people checking their watches. When the collection plate came around, people dropped in money like they were paying the bill. After 30 minutes, Jordan quietly left. This wasn't what he was looking for. His second try was Sacred Heart Catholic Church, on the West Side. The neighborhood was rougher here. Small sows, corner stores, with bars on the windows, and playgrounds where the swings had rusty chains. The church itself was old but clean, with simple wooden pews and candles flickering near a statue of Mary. An elderly Hispanic woman sat in front of him, lighting a candle and whispering prayers in Spanish. Tears rolled down her weathered cheeks as she clutched a photograph of a young man in military uniform. "Por favor, Dios," she whispered. "Keep my son safe." Jordan watched her pray with such deep feeling that it made his chest tight. This woman had real problems. Her son was probably overseas, maybe in danger. She was asking God to protect someone she loved more than her own life. What right did Jordan have to feel sorry for himself? He had money, health, and success. This woman was worried about her child's survival. He left during communion, feeling even more lost than before. The third church was Temple Beth Shalom, a Jewish synagogue in Skokie. Jordan had never been to a Jewish service before, but he'd heard that all religions talked about finding peace and purpose. Maybe they'd have answers. The service was different from anything he'd experienced. People wore small caps and prayer shawls. They read from books in Hebrew and sang in languages he didn't understand. But there was something beautiful about the traditions that had been passed down for thousands of years. During the service, a young father lifted his toddler son onto his shoulders so the boy could see better. Child giggled and clapped his hands during the singing. Families sat together, generations sharing the same beliefs and hopes. Jordan felt like an outsider looking through a window at something he'd never been part of. These people had faith that connected them to their history, their community, and their future. What did he have? After 3 weeks of church visits, Jordan was more confused than ever. He tried Methodist churches, Baptist churches, even a Buddhist meditation center downtown. Each place had good people doing their best to find meaning and peace. But nothing clicked for him. His teammates started noticing changes in his behavior. During practice, Jordan went through the motions but seemed distracted. His usual fire and intensity were missing. He played well enough. He was still Michael Jordan after all. But something was different. Coach Phil Jackson pulled him aside after a particularly flat practice session. "What's going on, MJ?" Jackson asked. They were alone in the gym, the sound of squeaking sneakers echoing from the weight room where other players were training. "Nothing, coach. I'm fine." Jackson studied Jordan's face. He'd coached him for years and knew when something was bothering his star player. "You sure? You seem like you're somewhere else lately." Jordan sat down on the bleachers and rubbed his temples. Jackson was more than just a coach. He was someone who thought deeply about life and meaning. If anyone might understand, it would be Phil. "Can I ask you something?" Jordan said. "Of course. Do you ever feel like you're going through the motions? Like everything you do is just empty?" Jackson sat down next to him. "You mean basketball?" "I mean everything. Basketball, life. All of it. I have everything a person could want. But I feel like something's missing, something important." Jackson nodded slowly. He'd been studying Buddhism and Eastern philosophy for years, always searching for deeper meaning beyond just winning games. "What are you looking for?" Jackson asked. "I don't know. That's the problem. I've been visiting churches, trying to find something. Faith? Maybe? Peace? I'm not sure. Churches can be good places to find community," Jackson said. "But maybe you're looking in the wrong direction." "What do you mean?" "Maybe instead of looking for God in buildings, you need to look for God in yourself. And in other people." Jordan frowned. "I don't understand." Jackson leaned back against the bleacher behind him. "In Buddhism, we believe that suffering comes from attachment to things that don't last. Fame, success, even winning championships, they're all temporary. The only things that really matter are compassion and connection with others." "So you're saying basketball doesn't matter?" "I'm saying basketball is what you do, not who you are. And maybe you're feeling empty because you've forgotten who you are underneath all the fame and expectations." Jordan thought about this. For so long, he'd been Michael Jordan, the basketball player that he'd lost track of just being Michael. When people looked at him, they saw the celebrity, the athlete, the brand. Even he had started seeing himself that way. "How do I find who I really am?" Jordan asked. "Stop trying so hard to find yourself," Jackson said. "Start trying to help others find themselves." Sometimes we discover our purpose by serving something bigger than our own needs. That night, Jordan drove around Chicago aimlessly. He passed through different neighborhoods, wealthy areas with big houses and perfect lawns, middle-class suburbs with soccer fields and strip malls, and poorer sections where kids played basketball on outdoor courts with bent rims and no nets. Everywhere he looked, he saw people living their lives, working, struggling, hoping, dreaming. Most of them would never be famous or rich. They'd never have their names in newspapers or their faces on TV. But they kept going anyway, finding meaning in their families, their communities, their daily acts of love and kindness. Maybe that was what he was missing. Connection to something real, something that mattered beyond scoreboards and trophies. The next morning, Jordan called his mother in North Carolina. "Mom, can I ask you something?" "Of course, baby. What's on your mind?" "Do you remember taking me to church when I was little?" Dolores Jordan was quiet for a moment. "Yes, I do. We went to New Birth Baptist every Sunday until you started getting serious about basketball." "Why do you ask?" "I've been thinking about Dad a lot lately. About faith. About what really matters. I feel like I'm lost, Mom." "Oh, Michael." Her voice was soft and understanding. "I've been waiting for you to find your way back to God. Success is wonderful, but it can't fill the hole in your heart that only faith can heal. I've been visiting different churches, but nothing feels right. I don't know where I belong. Have you tried going back to your roots? To the kind of church where you first learned about God's love?" Jordan thought about this. All the churches he'd visited had been either too fancy or too unfamiliar. Maybe he needed to find a simple place where regular people came to worship, not to be seen or to follow traditions they didn't understand, but just to find peace. "Mom, do you know any churches in Chicago? Small ones, where normal families go?" "Let me think." He could hear her flipping through papers on her end of the phone. "I have a friend from college who moved to Chicago years ago. She goes to a little church on the south side called Mount Sinai Baptist. She says it's like family there." "Mount Sinai?" "Yes. It's in an area called Bronzeville. The pastor's name is Marcus Williams, I think. My friend says he's a good man who really cares about his community." Jordan wrote down the address his mother gave him. Mount Sinai Baptist Church, 47th and Martin Luther King Jr. Drive. "Thanks, Mom. I love you." "I love you too, son. And Michael, your father would be proud of you for searching for something deeper. He always said that success without purpose is just noise." After he hung up, Jordan stared at the address he'd written down. This felt different somehow. Not like another attempt to find religion, but like coming home to something he'd lost a long time ago. He decided he would visit Mount Sinai the following Sunday. Not as Michael Jordan the celebrity, but as someone's son who needed to remember how to pray. Sunday morning came gray and cloudy. Jordan woke up early and sat by his bedroom window, watching the sun try to break through the thick Chicago clouds. His stomach felt nervous. Like before a big game, but different somehow. This wasn't about winning or losing. This was about finding something he'd lost a long time ago. He dressed carefully in a simple black suit, nothing flashy or expensive looking. No jewelry except his father's old watch. He pulled a plain baseball cap down over his face and looked at himself in the mirror. For once, he didn't look like Michael Jordan the superstar. He looked like someone who might blend into a crowd. The drive to Mount Sinai took him through parts of Chicago he rarely saw anymore. Away from the fancy downtown hotels and restaurants where he usually spent time. Away from the gleaming United Center where the Bulls played. This was the real Chicago, where regular people lived and worked and raised their families. Bronzeville had a history Jordan had never learned about in school. As he drove down Martin Luther King Jr. Drive, he passed old buildings that had once housed jazz clubs and theaters. In the 1920s and 1930s, this had been the heart of Chicago's African-American community. Famous musicians and writers had lived here. Families had built businesses and raised children and created something beautiful together. But that was decades ago. Now many of the buildings were empty or falling apart. Some lots were vacant where houses used to stand. Jordan saw corner stores with thick glass and bars on the windows. Playgrounds where the equipment was old and rusty. This was a neighborhood that had been forgotten by the city's growth and prosperity. Yet as he got closer to the church, Jordan noticed something else. Older people swept their front steps and tended small gardens. Children in their Sunday clothes walked hand in hand with their grandparents. People called out "Good morning" to their neighbors. Despite the struggles, there was still community here. Still hope. Mount Sinai Baptist Church sat on the corner like an anchor in the neighborhood. The red brick building was old, but well maintained. Someone had painted the white trim recently. The small lawn was neatly cut, and flowers had been planted along the walkway. A hand-painted sign out front read, "Mount Sinai Baptist Church, founded 1924, Pastor Gasses Williams, all welcome." Jordan parked across the street and watched as people arrived for service. Unlike the other churches he'd visited, these weren't wealthy families in expensive cars. He saw an elderly woman getting out of a bus, a young mother pushing a stroller while her 3 other children walked beside her, teenagers in suits that looked borrowed from older brothers. A man in a wheelchair being helped up the ramp by 2 friends. These were working people. People who cleaned office buildings and worked in factories and took care of other people's children. People who knew what real struggle looked like but still got dressed up on Sunday morning to come together and worship. Jordan took a deep breath and crossed the street. Inside, the church was nothing like the grand cathedrals he'd visited. The sanctuary was small and simple, with maybe 200 wooden pews facing a modest stage. The walls were painted cream color and decorated with pictures of Jesus and African-American church leaders. Sunlight streamed through tall windows that needed cleaning, but somehow made the whole room feel warm and golden. Jordan slipped into the very last pew and kept his head down. A few people glanced his way. He was hard to miss at 6'6", but no one stared or bothered him. In this church, everyone seemed focused on something more important than celebrity spotting. Mrs. Gladys Washington, a woman in her late 60s with silver hair and gentle hands, sat at an old piano. The instrument had seen better days. Some of the keys were yellow with age, and the wood was scratched. But when she began to play, it sounded like the voice of an angel. The choir stood up behind her. They weren't wearing matching robes like at the fancy churches. Some wore their best dresses. Others had on simple suits. But when they opened their mouths and began to sing Amazing Grace, Jordan felt something stir in his chest that he hadn't felt in years. Their voices blended together in perfect harmony, not because they'd been professionally trained, but because they'd been singing together for years, because they knew each other's struggles and joys, because they were family. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me, they sang. I once was lost, but now am found. Was blind, but now I see. Jordan felt tears starting to form in his eyes. The words hit him like they never had before. Lost. That's exactly how he felt. Like he'd been wandering in the dark for years, trying to find his way back to something important. Pastor Marcus Williams stepped up to the pulpit. He was a man in his early 50s with kind eyes and calloused hands that spoke of hard work. His suit was simple and clean, not expensive but worn with dignity. When he smiled at his congregation, it was the smile of someone who genuinely loved the people in front of him. "Good morning, Mount Sinai family," Pastor Williams said in a warm voice that filled every corner of the sanctuary. "Good morning, Pastor," the congregation replied together. Jordan noticed how they said it, not like a formal response, but like greeting someone they were happy to see. "Before we begin today's service," Pastor Williams continued, "let's take a moment to lift up those in our community who are struggling. Our brother Marcus Thompson has been out of work since the plant closed 3 months ago, but he's still coming to service every Sunday and volunteering with our youth program. Let's keep him in our prayers." People nodded and murmured amen, and "Yes, Lord." Jordan saw Mr. Thompson, a man about his father's age, sitting in the 3rd row with his family. Despite being unemployed, he wore his suit with pride and had his arm around his wife's shoulders. Sister Patterson got word this week that her grandson James is being deployed overseas. The pastor continued. "He's just 19 years old. Let's pray for his safety and for his grandmother's peace of mind." More nods and amens. Jordan watched Mrs. Patterson dab her eyes with a tissue while the moomin next to her rubbed her back gently. And Mother Jefferson is recovering from her hip surgery. She wanted everyone to know she's doing fine and will be back to cooking for our Wednesday dinners as soon as the doctor lets her. This got some chuckles and calls of "Thank you, Jesus" from people who clearly loved Mother Jefferson's cooking. Pastor Williams went through several more announcements. Someone needed help moving. Someone else was celebrating a new grandchild. The youth group was raising money for a summer trip. With each announcement, Jordan realized he was seeing something he'd never experienced. A real community. People who knew each other's names, who cared about each other's problems, who celebrated each other's joys. When it came time for prayer requests, people stood up throughout the sanctuary to share their needs. A young mother asked for prayers for her son, who was struggling in school. An elderly man requested prayers for his late wife's birthday. He missed her terribly but wanted to remember the good times. A teenager asked the congregation to pray for his father, who was battling addiction. Each request was met with nods and "We're praying for you," and promises to help however they could. No one seemed embarrassed to admit they needed help. No one judged anyone else for their struggles. Then Pastor Williams began his sermon, and Jordan found himself leaning forward to listen. "Today I want to talk about carrying heavy loads," Pastor Williams said. "We all have burdens in our lives. Some of us are worried about money. Some are dealing with sickness. Some are grieving losses. Some are struggling with loneliness, or fear, or feeling like we don't matter." Jordan felt like the pastor was speaking directly to him. "Now I could stand up here and tell you that if you just pray hard enough, all your problems will disappear. But that wouldn't be honest, and it wouldn't be helpful. Life is hard. Bad things happen to good people. That's just the truth." Jordan appreciated the honesty. Too many of the other pastors he'd heard had promised easy answers to complicated problems. "But here's what I know," Pastor Williams continued. "We don't have to carry our heavy loads alone. God doesn't promise to take away all our problems, but He promises to help us carry them. And He does that through community, through family, through people who care about us." The pastor told a story about trying to move a huge boulder from his backyard. He pushed and strained for hours, but couldn't budge it even an inch. Finally, frustrated and exhausted, he asked his neighbors for help. Together, 5 men lifted the rock and moved it easily. The rock didn't get any lighter, Pastor Williams explained. But the load got shared. And when we share our burdens, something beautiful happens. We realize we're not alone. We realize other people care about us. We realize that our struggles don't define us. Our community does. Jordan thought about all the burdens he'd been carrying alone. The guilt about his father's death. The pressure of being everyone's hero. The loneliness that came with fame. The emptiness that success couldn't fill. He'd been trying to lift these weights by himself for years. And they were crushing him. Some of you might be thinking, "Pastor, I don't want to bother other people with my problems." Williams continued. "Or I should be strong enough to handle this myself." But let me tell you something. Asking for help isn't weakness. It's wisdom. It's courage. It's what community is for. As the sermon continued, Jordan looked around at the faces in the congregation. He saw people nodding along, clearly relating to the pastor's words. These weren't people who had easy lives. Many of them faced challenges that made his problems seem small, but they weren't facing those challenges alone. When the service ended with a final hymn, Jordan stayed in his seat. As people began filing out, families hugged each other and made plans for Sunday dinner. Children ran between the pews, playing tag while their parents talked. Elderly members moved slowly but were helped by younger people who treated them with obvious love and respect. For the first time in months, Jordan felt something he'd almost forgotten. Peace. Not the temporary satisfaction winning a game, but deep, lasting peace. The feeling that he was exactly where he needed to be. As the sanctuary emptied, Jordan remained in his pew with his head bowed. He wasn't sure how to pray anymore, but he tried anyway. "God," he whispered, "I don't know what I'm doing. I have everything I thought I wanted, but I feel empty inside. These people have real problems, but they seem to have something I've lost. Help me find it. Help me remember how to be more than just what people expect me to be." When he looked up, Pastor Williams was walking toward him. Pastor Williams walked slowly down the aisle, his footsteps quiet on the worn carpet. He didn't hurry or act excited like someone who'd just spotted a celebrity. Instead, he moved with the calm patience of someone who'd learned that rushing never helped when people were hurting. Jordan kept his head down, hoping the pastor would just walk past. He wasn't ready to explain why he was there or answer questions about basketball. He just wanted to sit in this peaceful place a little longer. But Pastor Williams stopped at the end of Jordan's pew and waited. Not staring, not demanding attention, just being present. After what felt like a long time but was probably only a minute, Jordan finally looked up. "I'm Pastor Marcus Williams," the man said gently. "I don't believe we've met." Jordan studied the pastor's face. There was no excitement there, no starstruck expression, just kindness and something that looked like understanding. Jordan began, then stopped. He was tired of being Michael Jordan, the basketball player. "I'm Mike." "Nice to meet you, Mike." Pastor Williams smiled. "Would you like to talk? You look like someone who has something on his mind." Jordan almost said no. Almost made an excuse and left like he had at all the other churches. But something about Pastor Williams felt different. "Safe. I don't really know why I'm here," Jordan admitted. "That's okay," the pastor said. "Sometimes we don't know what we need until we find it. Would you like to come to my office? We could talk more privately there." Jordan looked around the sanctuary. Few people were still cleaning up, stacking chairs, and picking up programs. He felt exposed sitting in the open. "Yeah," he said. "That would be good." Pastor Williams led him through a door behind the pulpit to a small hallway lined with pictures of church activities. Jordan saw photos of community dinners, youth groups, elderly members celebrating birthdays, and families at church picnics. Everyone looked genuinely happy. The pastor's office was tiny, but comfortable. The walls were covered with more photos of church members, certificates from community organizations, and shelves full of well-read books. An old desk sat in one corner, covered with papers and letters. Two mismatched chairs faced each other near a small window. "Coffee?" Pastor Williams asked, pointing to an ancient coffee maker on a table by the window. "I made it fresh this morning, though I should warn you it's pretty strong." "Sure, thanks." The pastor poured 2 cups from a pot that looked like it had been making coffee since the church was built. The office smelled like old books and fresh flowers. Someone had put daisies in a mason jar on the windowsill. "So, Mike?" Pastor Williams said, settling into one of the chairs. "What brings you to Mount Sinai?" Jordan wrapped his hands around the warm coffee mug and tried to figure out where to start. "My mother gave me your address. She said this was a good church for people who need to find their way back to God." "Your mother sounds wise. Is that what you're looking for? A way back to God?" "I think so. Maybe. I don't really know." Jordan felt frustrated with himself. He could explain complex basketball plays to reporters, but he couldn't explain what was happening inside his own heart. Pastor Williams waited patiently, sipping his coffee and giving Jordan time to find his words. "I've been visiting different churches for weeks," Jordan finally said, trying to find something. "But nothing felt right until I walked in here today." What felt right about it? Jordan thought about this. The people, I guess? They seemed real. Like they actually care about each other. Not just showing up to be seen or follow traditions they don't understand. "We are real," Pastor Williams said with a smile. "Real messy, real struggling, real loving people. That's what makes us family." "Family," Jordan repeated. The word hit him hard. "I haven't felt like part of a family in a long time. Not since my father died." "I'm sorry for your loss. Losing a parent is one of life's hardest challenges." Jordan felt tears, starting again. He'd gotten good at hiding his emotions, but something about Pastor Williams made him want to be honest. "It's been 5 years, but it still feels like yesterday sometimes. He was murdered, and Jordan's voice broke. "I never got to say goodbye. Never got to tell him how much he meant to me." Pastor Williams leaned forward slightly. "Grief doesn't follow a schedule, Mike. There's no deadline for missing someone you love." "What was your father like?" "He was everything I'm not," Jordan said. "Simple. Content. He didn't need to be famous or rich to know he mattered. He found joy in everyday things. Working in his garden, watching baseball games, spending time with family. He knew who he was." "And you don't?" Jordan laughed, but it came out bitter. "Everyone thinks they know who I am. But most days, I don't have a clue. I feel like I'm playing a character that everyone expects me to be. But I've forgotten who I really am underneath all of it." Pastor Williams nodded like he understood completely. Fame can be a heavy burden. Everyone wants something from you. But no one just wants to know you. Exactly, Jordan said, surprised that someone finally got it. I get hundreds of letters every week from people asking for help. Sick kids who want to meet me. Families who need money. Communities that want me to visit. And I want to help everyone. But I can't. I'm just one person. What happens when you can't help? Jordan's hands started shaking as he thought about Diego Santos. A few weeks ago, I got a letter from a mother in Phoenix. Her 8-year-old son was dying of cancer, and his biggest dream was to meet me. Just for a few minutes. I was going to arrange it, but when I called the hospital, he was gone, Pastor Williams finished quietly. 3 days earlier, while I was playing basketball and signing autographs and living my perfect life, this little boy died waiting to meet his hero. Jordan set down his coffee cup because his hands were trembling too much to hold it steady. How many Diego Santos are there? How many letters do I never even see? How many people am I failing every day? Pastor Williams was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was gentle but firm. Mike, can I tell you something? You're trying to be God, and that's not your job. Jordan looked up, confused. What do you mean? You think being successful means you have to save everyone. Fix every problem. Be everyone's hero. But that's impossible. And trying to do it is destroying you. But if I can help people, shouldn't I? Of course you should help when you can. But you can't help everyone. And that's not a failure. That's just being human. Pastor Williams got up and walked to his bookshelf. He pulled out a worn photo and handed it Jordan. It showed a much younger Pastor Williams in a social worker's uniform, standing with a group of children in what looked like a rough neighborhood. Before I became a pastor, I worked for the Department of Children and Family Services on Chicago's West Side. I saw kids living in terrible situations, abuse, neglect, poverty, violence. I wanted to save every single one of them. Jordan studied the photo. The young Pastor Williams looked determined but exhausted. I worked 18-hour days. The pastor continued. I gave away my own money to families who couldn't pay rent. I let kids sleep on my couch when they had nowhere else to go. I thought my purpose was to fix everyone's problems. What happened? I had a nervous breakdown. Ended up in the hospital for 2 weeks because I'd pushed my body and mind past their breaking points. I was so focused on saving everyone else that I nearly destroyed myself. Pastor Williams sat back down and looked directly at Jordan. That's when I learned the difference between helping and enabling, between serving others and trying to be their savior. I don't understand the difference. Helping means walking alongside people in their struggles, being present with them, offering support and hope. Enabling means trying to solve all their problems for them, which actually keeps them from learning to solve problems themselves. Jordan thought about this. So you're saying I shouldn't help people? I'm saying you should help people in ways that empower them, not ways that make them dependent on you. And I'm saying you can't save everyone, but you can show everyone they're not alone. How do you decide who to help and who you can't? Pastor Williams smiled. I don't decide. God does. My job is to be faithful with the opportunities He puts in front of me, not to create opportunities that exhaust me and help no one. But what about Diego Santos? What about all the kids like him? You can't save children from cancer, Mike, but you can support organizations that care for sick children. You can visit hospitals when you're able. You can use your platform to raise awareness and funds for research. You can pray for families facing these challenges. Jordan felt some of the weight on his chest starting to lift. So I don't have to carry everyone's problems? No, you don't. In fact, trying to carry everyone's problems means you won't be able to help anyone effectively. It's like trying to save a drowning person when you can't swim yourself. You'll both end up underwater. They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes. Jordan looked around the small office and noticed details he'd missed before. A child's drawing taped to the wall showed Pastor Williams surrounded by stick-figure people, all holding hands, a thank you card from someone whose utilities the church had helped pay, a photo of Pastor Williams and his wife at their wedding 25 years ago. Pastor Williams, Jordan said finally, how do you do it? How do you serve this community without burning out like you did before? I learned something important during my breakdown, the pastor replied. My purpose isn't to fix everyone's problems. My purpose is to show people they're not alone in their struggles. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is simply being present with them in their pain. Being present, sitting with people when they're hurting, listening without trying to solve everything, letting them know that someone sees them and cares about them. You'd be amazed how much healing happens just from people knowing they matter to someone else. Jordan thought about the church service he'd just attended. Pastor Williams hadn't promised to fix Mr. Thompson's unemployment or bring Mrs. Patterson's grandson home safely. He'd simply acknowledged their struggles and reminded them they weren't facing those struggles alone. "That's what I felt today during the service," Jordan said. "Like I wasn't the only person carrying heavy things. Because you're not. Everyone in that sanctuary is dealing with something difficult. But we're dealing with it together. Can I ask you something personal?" "Of course. Do you ever feel like giving up? When you see all the problems in this neighborhood, all the things that need fixing, doesn't it feel overwhelming?" Pastor Williams nodded. "Every day, this community faces challenges that one small church can't solve. Poverty, violence, lack of opportunities for young people. Sometimes I lie awake at night thinking about everything that needs to change. How do you keep going?" "I focus on what I can control, not what I can't. I can't eliminate poverty, but I can make sure no one in our church goes hungry. I can't stop all violence, but I can provide a safe place for kids to come after school. I can't create jobs, but I can help people develop skills and connections." Jordan was beginning to understand. "So you do what you can and trust God with the rest?" "Exactly. And here's what I've learned. When you focus on doing small things with great love, those small things add up to something bigger than you ever imagined." Pastor Williams stood up and walked back to his bookshelf. He pulled out a thick folder and brought it to Jordan. "These are letters from people whose lives have been touched by our church's ministry. Not people we've saved or fixed, but people who felt loved and supported during difficult times. Read a few." Jordan opened the folder and read the first letter. It was from a young mother thanking the church for providing childcare while she attended job training classes. The second was from a teenager who credited the youth program with keeping him off the streets. The third was from an elderly man who said the church's visiting ministry made him feel less lonely after his wife died. None of the letters described dramatic rescues or life-changing miracles, but they all talked about feeling valued, supported, and loved. "This is what real ministry looks like," Pastor Williams said. "Not flashy or dramatic, but steady and faithful. Showing up day after day to love people where they are." Jordan closed the folder and looked at Pastor Williams with new respect. "How did you know I needed to hear this?" "Because I've been watching you during the service. You had the look of someone carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. And when people try to carry more than they're meant to carry, they always end up breaking." Jordan felt like a huge burden was being lifted from his chest. For the first time in months, he could breathe deeply. "Pastor Williams, can I ask you a favor?" "What's that?" "Would it be okay if I came back next Sunday? Not as someone famous, just as Mike who's trying to figure out how to help people without destroying himself." Pastor Williams smiled, the warmest smile Jordan had seen in years. "Mike, you're welcome here anytime. This church is for people who need to learn how to carry their burdens together. Sounds like you qualify." As Jordan prepared to leave, Pastor Williams walked him to the door. "Mike, can I give you some homework for this week?" "Sure. Instead of trying to help everyone, pick one person. Someone right in front of you who needs what you have to offer. Don't try to change their whole life. Just be present with them. See what happens." Jordan shook the pastor's hand, feeling more hopeful than he had in months. "Thank you," he said. "I'll see you next Sunday." As Jordan walked back to his car, he felt like a different person than the one who had arrived that morning. He still didn't have all the answers, but for the first time, he felt like he was asking the right questions. The drive home gave Jordan time to think about Pastor Williams' words. Pick one person, be present with them. Don't try to change their whole life. It sounded simple, but after years of trying to be everyone's hero, Jordan wasn't sure he knew how to help just one person without making it complicated. Back at his apartment, Jordan sat by the window and watched boats move across Lake Michigan. The water was calm today, reflecting the afternoon sun like a mirror. He thought about his conversation with the pastor and realized something important. For the first time in months, he felt hopeful. His phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. It was his mother calling from North Carolina. "Michael? How are you, baby?" Actually, Mom, I'm doing better. I went to that church you told me about. Mount Sinai? What did you think? Jordan smiled, remembering the warmth he'd felt during the service. It was perfect. The pastor is a good man named Marcus Williams. He helped me understand some things about myself. I'm so glad, Dolores Jordan said, and he could hear the relief in her voice. I've been worried about you. You sounded so lost when we talked before. I was lost. Maybe I still am a little. But Pastor Williams gave me something to think about. He said I should stop trying to help everyone and focus on helping one person at a time. Your father used to say something like that, his mother said softly. He'd say, you can't light up the whole world, but you can light up the corner where you're standing. Jordan felt that familiar ache in his chest when his mother mentioned his father. James Jordan had been gone for 5 years, but Jordan still missed him every day. Mom, do you think Dad would be proud of what I've accomplished? Of course he would, baby. But I think what would make him most proud is seeing you care about being a good person, not just a good basketball player. After they hung up, Jordan spent the evening thinking about his father's advice. Light up the corner where you're standing. Maybe that's what Pastor Williams had been trying to tell him. Instead of worrying about all the people he couldn't help, maybe he should focus on the people right in front of him. But who was right in front of him? The next morning at practice, Jordan played with a focus his teammates hadn't seen in weeks. He was still distracted, but in a different way. Instead of being lost in his own thoughts, he found himself really watching his teammates for the first time in months. Dennis Rodman was his usual colorful self, making jokes and keeping everyone loose. But Jordan noticed something he'd missed before. When the younger players made mistakes, Rodman always found a way to encourage them without making them feel stupid. Behind all the wild hair and crazy antics, Dennis really cared about his teammates. Scottie Pippen worked harder than anyone else on the team, never complaining about being in Jordan's shadow. He made everyone around him better, and never asked for credit. Steve Kerr, who wasn't the most talented player, spent extra time helping rookies with their shooting form. Jordan realized he'd been so focused on his own performance and his own problems that he'd stopped seeing his teammates as people. They were just tools to help him win games, but each of them had their own struggles, their own dreams, their own lives outside of basketball. After practice, Coach Jackson pulled Jordan aside. "You seem different today," Jackson said, "more present. What's changed?" Jordan thought about how to explain without revealing too much. "I've been thinking about what you said, about finding purpose in serving others instead of just focusing on my own success." Jackson nodded. "And what have you discovered?" "That I don't know how to do it. I've been so focused on being the best basketball player that I forgot how to just be a good person." "Well," Jackson said with a smile, "the season's almost over. Maybe it's time to learn." That afternoon, Jordan drove back to Mount Sinai. Not for another service, but because he wanted to see Pastor Williams again. He had an idea, but he needed to talk it through with someone who would understand. He found the pastor in the church's small kitchen, preparing for the Wednesday evening community dinner. Pastor Williams was wearing old jeans and a t-shirt, chopping vegetables for what looked like a huge pot of soup. "Mike," Pastor Williams said, looking genuinely happy to see him. "I wasn't expecting you back so soon. How are you doing?" "I've been thinking about what you said, about picking one person to help. And I realized I don't really know how to help anyone. I'm good at writing checks and showing up for photo opportunities, but I don't know how to actually be present with people." Pastor Williams set down his knife and wiped his hands on a towel. "What are you thinking?" Jordan took a deep breath. "What if I spent some time here? Not as Michael Jordan, the celebrity, but just as Mike, the volunteer. Learning how to really help people instead of just throwing money at problems." Pastor Williams studied Jordan's face carefully. "That's a big commitment. And it would mean giving up some of your privacy. People here would get to know the real you. Maybe that's what I need. Maybe I need to remember who the real me is." "What about your basketball schedule? The playoffs are coming up. I could come in the mornings before practice, or in the evenings after games." "Whatever you need." Pastor Williams was quiet for a long moment, considering the request. "Mike, I appreciate what you're offering, but I need to know this isn't some kind of publicity stunt. My congregation has been hurt before by people who wanted to use them to make themselves look good." Jordan understood the concern. "Pastor, I give you my word that this stays between us. No cameras, no reporters, no publicity." I just want to learn how to serve people the right way. And you're prepared for people to see you at your worst? Because real service isn't glamorous. It's cleaning up messes and dealing with problems that don't have easy solutions. I think I need that, Jordan said honestly. I need to do something that matters more than basketball. Pastor Williams looked at Jordan for another long moment, then broke into a smile. All right, Mike. But we do this my way. You show up when I tell you to show up. You do what I tell you to do. And if I think you're not taking it seriously, you're done. Agreed? Agreed. Good. Be here tomorrow morning at 6 a.m. Wear old clothes and be ready to work. We start with the food pantry. Jordan felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. What exactly does that involve? Loading trucks, carrying boxes, sorting donations? Nothing fancy, but it's important work. We serve about 150 families every week. I'll be here. As Jordan prepared to leave, Pastor Williams called after him. Mike, one more thing. If you're serious about this, you need to understand something. Once these people know you, really know you, you'll be part of their family. And family takes care of each other. Are you ready for that kind of commitment? Jordan thought about the loneliness he'd been feeling, the emptiness that success couldn't fill. The idea of being part of a real family, even if it meant responsibility and sacrifice, sounded like exactly what he needed. Yes, he said. I'm ready. That night, Jordan lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow he would begin a different kind of training, not for basketball, but for life. He was nervous about whether he could do it, whether he could be the kind of person Pastor Williams needed him to be. But for the first time in years, he was also excited. Excited to learn something new. Excited to be useful in ways that had nothing to do with fame or talent. Excited to discover who Mike was when nobody was watching and nobody was keeping score. He called his mother one more time before going to sleep. Mom, I'm gonna try something new. I'm gonna spend some time volunteering at the church, learning how to really help people. That sounds wonderful, baby. Your father would be so proud. I hope so. I'm trying to remember what he taught me about finding joy in simple things. He always said the best part of his day was doing something kind for someone else, even if it was small. He used to say that's how you know you're living right, when you go to bed thinking about how you helped someone, not about what someone did for you. After Jordan hung up, he thought about that. When was the last time he'd gone to bed thinking about how he'd helped someone? Really helped them, not just signed an autograph or posed for a picture. He couldn't remember. But starting tomorrow, that was going to change. Jordan set his alarm for 5:30 a.m. and went to sleep with a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. The excitement of doing something that mattered more than winning. The next morning, Jordan woke up before his alarm. He put on old jeans, a plain t-shirt, and work boots he hadn't worn since college. Looking in the mirror, he barely recognized himself. Gone was the polished superstar. In his place was someone who looked ready to work with his hands. He drove to Mount Sinai as the sun was just starting to rise over Chicago. The neighborhood looked different in the early morning light, quieter, more peaceful. People were heading to work, children were walking to school, and life was happening in all its ordinary, beautiful ways. Pastor Williams was already at the church, along with 5 other volunteers Jordan didn't recognize. They were all wearing work clothes and looked like they'd done this many times before. Everyone, this is Mike, Pastor Williams said simply. He's going to be helping us out for a while. The volunteers nodded and welcomed Jordan without any fuss. If they recognized him, they didn't show it. They just handed him a pair of work gloves and put him to work. For the next 3 hours, Jordan did something he hadn't done in years: manual labor. He loaded goods from delivery trucks. He carried heavy boxes of fresh vegetables donated by local grocery stores. He sorted through bags of clothing donations, making sure everything was clean and in good condition. The work was hard and repetitive, but Jordan found it strangely satisfying. Each box he carried, each item he sorted, was going to help a family in need. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real. It mattered. Around 10 a.m., families began arriving for the food pantry distribution. Jordan watched from behind the sorting table as people came through with their children, selecting groceries with careful dignity. No one seemed embarrassed to be there. This was their community, their neighbors helping neighbors. Mrs. Anderson, a grandmother in her 70s, approached the table where Jordan was working. She was with 3 young children who called her Nana and held her hands tightly. "Good morning," she said to Jordan with a warm smile. "I don't think we've met. Are you new here?" "Yes, ma'am. I'm Mike." "Well, welcome to Mount Sinai, Mike. I'm Betty Anderson. These are my grandbabies, Marcus, Keisha, and little James." The children said hello politely, and Jordan noticed how well-behaved they were. Their clothes were clean but worn, and they stayed close to their grandmother like they'd been taught. "How long have you been coming here?" Jordan asked Mrs. Anderson. "About 6 months now. I've been raising these babies since their mama passed last year. Social Security doesn't stretch as far as it used to, so the church helps us with groceries." Jordan felt his heart clench. This woman was raising 3 children on a fixed income after losing her daughter. But she wasn't complaining or asking for pity. She was just doing what needed to be done with grace and dignity. "That must be really hard," Jordan said. "Hard times don't last, but strong people do," Mrs. Anderson replied with a smile that reminded Jordan of his own grandmother. "Besides, look at these beautiful babies. They're worth every sacrifice." As Mrs. Anderson and her grandchildren moved through the line, selecting groceries and chatting with other families, Jordan realized something important. These people weren't just recipients of charity. They were a community. They knew each other's names, asked about each other's health, celebrated each other's good news. This was what Pastor Williams had been talking about. Real ministry wasn't about one person helping another from a distance. It was about people helping each other as family. When the food distribution was finished, Jordan helped clean up and reload the trucks. His back was sore and his hands were dirty, but he felt more satisfied than he had after winning some games. "How was your first day?" Pastor Williams asked as they were locking up. "Eye-opening," Jordan said honestly. "I had no idea how much work went into this. This is just the beginning. Tomorrow we're visiting elderly members who can't leave their homes. Thursday is the after-school program. Friday, we're helping repair Mrs. Johnson's roof." Jordan nodded, feeling both excited and overwhelmed. "Pastor Williams, can I ask you something?" "Sure. How do you keep track of everyone's needs?" Mrs. Anderson raising her grandchildren, Mrs. Johnson's roof, the elderly members who need visits. It seems like so much. Pastor Williams smiled. "That's what community is for, Mike. We don't expect one person to meet everyone's needs. We all do what we can, and together it's enough. Can I be part of that?" "Really part of it? You already are," Pastor Williams said. "The moment you put on those work gloves and started carrying boxes, you became part of this family. The question is, are you ready for what that means?" Jordan thought about Mrs. Anderson and her grandchildren, about the dignity with which people had received help, about the satisfaction he'd felt doing work that truly mattered. "I'm ready," he said. And for the first time in years, Jordan meant it completely. For the next 4 days, Jordan lived 2 completely different lives. In the mornings, he was Mike the volunteer at Mount Sinai, wearing work clothes and helping families in need. In the afternoons and evenings, he was Michael Jordan, the basketball superstar, practicing with the Bulls and preparing for the playoffs. The contrast was startling. At the church, people treated him like family. They asked about his day, shared their problems, and included him in their conversations about ordinary things. At the United Center, everyone wanted something from him. Interviews, autographs, perfect performances. But Jordan found himself thinking more about the church family than basketball. He thought about Carlos Martinez, a young veteran who volunteered at the food pantry to stay busy and avoid thinking about the war. He thought about Mother Ruby Jefferson, the 85-year-old woman who insisted on cooking for everyone despite her recent hip surgery. He thought about the teenagers in the after-school program who treated him like a big brother, not a celebrity. On Thursday afternoon, Jordan helped 12-year-old Jasmine Patterson with her math homework. She was Mrs. Patterson's granddaughter, the same Mrs. Patterson whose grandson was deployed overseas. Jasmine was struggling with fractions, and Jordan found himself explaining denominators with the same patience his father had once shown him. "Mr. Mike," Jasmine said as she finally understood the problem, "you're really good at teaching. Do you have kids?" "No, I don't," Jordan replied. "You should. You'd be a great dad." The comment stayed with Jordan through his evening practice. He'd always assumed he'd have children someday, but basketball had consumed so much of his life that he'd never thought seriously about family. Watching the families at Mount Sinai made him realize what he might be missing. Friday morning brought the biggest challenge yet. Jordan joined a team of volunteers helping to repair Mrs. Johnson's roof. The 70-year-old widow had been dealing with leaks for months, but couldn't afford professional repairs. Jordan had never done construction work, but he followed the lead of Tom Washington, a retired carpenter who attended Mount Sinai. Tom patiently taught Jordan how to replace damaged shingles and seal problem areas. "The key is taking your time," Tom explained as they worked side by side. "Rushing leads to mistakes, and mistakes on a roof can cause bigger problems later." Jordan found the work satisfying in a way that basketball never was. When they finished, Mrs. Johnson invited everyone inside for lunch. Her small house was filled with family photos and handmade quilts. She served sandwiches and sweet tea while telling stories about her late husband and their 50 years of marriage. "You know what made our marriage work?" she asked Jordan as they sat in her tiny kitchen. "We took care of each other. When he was sick, I nursed him. When I was scared, he comforted me. That's what love is, showing up every day, especially when it's hard." Jordan thought about how he'd been living his life. Always moving, always performing, never staying in one place long enough to really take care of anyone. The people at Mount Sinai were teaching him something he'd never learned: how to be still long enough to love deeply. That evening, Jordan had dinner with Pastor Williams and his wife Janet at their small house near the church. Janet was a school teacher who worked with special needs children. She was quiet but wise, and Jordan could see why Pastor Williams had married her. "Marcus told me about the work you've been doing," Janet said as they shared a simple meal of fried chicken and vegetables. "The community has really embraced you." "I've embraced them too," Jordan said. "I never realized what I was missing by living in isolation." "What will you do when basketball season ends?" Pastor Williams asked. Jordan had been thinking about that question all week. "I don't know yet. But I know I want to keep being part of this community. Maybe expand what we're doing here. Help other neighborhoods start similar programs." Pastor Williams smiled. "Just remember what I told you about not trying to save everyone at once. One person at a time," Jordan said. "I'm learning." After dinner, Jordan drove home feeling more content than he had in months. The work at Mount Sinai was teaching him things no amount of success could provide: humility, patience, and the deep satisfaction that came from serving others. But his peaceful evening was shattered by what happened next. Jordan was getting ready for bed when his phone rang. It was Pastor Williams, and his voice was urgent. "Mike, we need you at the hospital. There's been a shooting." Jordan's blood went cold. "Who?" "Marcus Thompson, Mrs. Patterson's 12-year-old grandson. He was walking home from the library when he got caught in crossfire between two gangs. He's at University of Chicago Medical Center." Jordan didn't hesitate. "I'll be right there." He threw on clothes and raced across the city, his mind spinning with fear and anger. Marcus Thompson was a good kid from a good family. His grandfather, Mr. Thompson, had been unemployed for months, but still volunteered with the church's youth program. His grandmother made sure he did his homework every night. Marcus loved basketball and dreamed of playing in high school. Now he was fighting for his life because he'd been in the wrong place at the wrong time. The hospital waiting room was crowded with families dealing with their own emergencies. Jordan found the Thompson family huddled together in a corner. Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, Marcus's parents, and several other relatives from the church. Their faces showed the raw terror that every parent fears. Pastor Williams was with them, offering quiet comfort and prayer. When he saw Jordan, he walked over to explain the situation. "Marcus is in surgery. The bullet hit his spine. The doctors say he'll live, but..." Pastor Williams's voice broke slightly. "He may never walk again." Jordan felt like he'd been punched in the stomach. This bright, hopeful 12-year-old boy might spend the rest of his life in a wheelchair because he'd wanted to check out library books. "How's the family holding up?" Jordan asked. "As well as can be expected. They're scared and angry and heartbroken. And they have no insurance. The medical bills are going to destroy them financially." Jordan looked at the Thompson family, working people who'd done everything right but were about to face a crisis that could ruin them. Mr. Thompson had been looking for work for months. Mrs. Thompson cleaned office buildings at night to make ends meet. They were good people facing an impossible situation. "I want to help," Jordan said quietly. "I know you do. But remember what we talked about. This family needs support. not someone trying to solve all their problems. Jordan nodded, but inside he was already planning. He could pay for Marcus's medical care. He could arrange for the best doctors and rehabilitation specialists. He could make sure the family never worried about money again. But as he sat with the Thompson family through the long night, Jordan realized something important. They didn't need him to save them. They needed him to walk through this crisis with them. So that's what he did. He brought them coffee and sandwiches from the cafeteria. He helped entertain Marcus's younger sister, while the adults talked to doctors. He sat quietly and listened when Mrs. Thompson needed to cry about her fears for her grandson's future. Other families in the waiting room began recognizing Jordan. But something remarkable happened. Instead of asking for autographs or photos, they treated him like part of the community. Mrs. Williams, no relation to the pastor, shared her homemade cookies with him. Teenage Damon Jefferson asked Jordan to pray with him for his injured cousin in the next room. Jordan realized he was witnessing something he'd never experienced before: authentic community in the midst of crisis. These people were facing real emergencies, but they were facing them together. They shared food, offered comfort, and supported each other without being asked. At dawn, Dr. Sarah Kim emerged from surgery with news. Marcus would survive, but the damage to his spinal cord was severe. He would likely never walk again. The road to recovery would be long and expensive. The Thompson family cried, tears of relief mixed with grief. Their son was alive, but his life would never be the same. Jordan watched Mr. Thompson struggle with emotions he couldn't express. This proud man who'd worked with his hands his whole life was facing the possibility that his grandson would never run or play sports again. The family that was already struggling financially now faced medical bills that could bankrupt them. "We'll get through this," Mrs. Thompson said, holding her husband's hand. "We'll figure out how to manage. Our boy is alive, and that's what matters." Jordan was amazed by their strength. They were facing a nightmare, but they weren't giving up or feeling sorry for themselves. They were already planning how to adapt and move forward. As the sun rose over Chicago, Jordan drove the Thompson family home from the hospital. In the car, Mr. Thompson finally recognized him. "You're Michael Jordan," he said quietly. "Yes, sir," Jordan replied. "But this week I've just been Mike, and you've taught me more than you know." "What do you mean?" "I've been watching your family face the worst crisis imaginable, and you're doing it with more grace and strength than I've ever shown facing much smaller problems. You're showing me what real courage looks like." Mr. Thompson was quiet for a moment. "Son, courage isn't about not being scared. It's about doing what needs to be done even when you're terrified. My grandson needs us to be strong for him, so that's what we'll be." By the time Jordan got home, news vans were already setting up outside Mount Sinai Baptist Church. Word had leaked that Michael Jordan had spent the night at the hospital with the shooting victim's family. Reporters wanted the story. Fans wanted to see him. The quiet week of anonymous service was about to become a media circus. Jordan sat in his car across from the church, watching reporters interview anyone who would talk to them. He thought about Marcus Thompson lying in a hospital bed, facing a future he'd never imagined. He thought about the Thompson family's dignity in the face of crisis. He thought about the community that had surrounded them with love and support. And he made a decision that would change everything. Instead of hiding from the cameras, Jordan was going to use them. He was going to tell the world about Mount Sinai Baptist Church and the community that had taught him what really mattered. He was going to challenge people to stop looking for heroes in celebrities and start looking for heroes in their own neighborhoods. But first, he had to face the media storm that was about to engulf the place that had become his sanctuary. Jordan took a deep breath, got out of his car, and walked toward the cameras that would soon capture the most important words he'd ever spoken. The reporters spotted Jordan before he was halfway across the street. Cameras swung in his direction like searchlights, and suddenly the quiet corner where Mount Sinai Baptist Church had stood peacefully for 74 years became the center of a media storm. Michael Jordan," voices called out. "Can you tell us about last night? Is it true you've been volunteering here? How long have you known the Thompson family?" Jordan kept walking steadily toward the church steps where Pastor Williams stood like a guardian, politely but firmly turning away reporters who tried to push past him into the sanctuary. "This is a house of worship," Pastor Williams was saying to a particularly aggressive cameraman. "If you want to attend service, you're welcome. If you're here to exploit our community, please leave." Jordan reached the steps and stopped. He could have walked past the reporters into the church, avoiding their questions and protecting his privacy. A week ago, that's exactly what he would have done. But everything had changed since he'd started working with this community. He thought about Marcus Thompson lying in a hospital bed, probably watching this circus on TV. He thought about Mrs. Anderson and her grandchildren, who deserved better than having their church turned into a zoo. He thought about all the families who would be coming to Sunday service in a few hours, hoping to find peace in their sanctuary. Jordan turned to face the cameras. "Good morning," he said quietly. The reporters immediately stopped shouting and leaned in to hear him. "My name is Michael Jordan, and I want to tell you about the most important week of my life." The questions started flying again, but Jordan held up his hand for silence. "For the past week, I've been volunteering here at Mount Sinai Baptist Church. Not as Michael Jordan, the basketball player, but as Mike, someone who needed to learn what real service looks like." A reporter called out, "Is this a publicity stunt?" Jordan looked directly into the camera. "If this were a publicity stunt, would I have kept it secret for a week? Would I have been loading boxes in the food pantry at 6 in the morning with no cameras around?" He paused, gathering his thoughts. These might be the most important words he ever spoke. Last night, a 12-year-old boy named Marcus Thompson was shot while walking home from the library. Marcus is a good kid from a good family. He loves basketball and dreams of playing in high school. Now he may never walk again. Jordan's voice grew stronger as he continued. "I spent the night at the hospital with Marcus's family. Not because I'm famous, but because that's what family does. And this community has become my family. What does this mean for your basketball career?" Another reporter shouted. "Basketball is what I do," Jordan said. "But it's not who I am. This community has taught me that who I am is shaped by how I treat people when the cameras aren't rolling." He gestured toward the church behind him. "Pastor Marcus Williams and the families of Mount Sinai have shown me what real strength looks like. It's not about being the best athlete or the most successful person. It's about showing up for each other, especially when times are hard." Jordan talked about Mrs. Anderson raising her grandchildren with dignity, about Mr. Thompson volunteering with the youth program even while unemployed, about Mother Jefferson cooking for everyone despite her recent surgery, about young people choosing hope over despair in a neighborhood that had been forgotten by the city's prosperity. "These people face real challenges every day," Jordan said, "but they don't face them alone. They've built something beautiful here. A community where people take care of each other not because they have to, but because they choose to." A reporter asked, "What can people do to help Marcus Thompson's family?" Jordan had been ready for this question. A week ago, he would have announced a charity fund or organized a celebrity fundraiser. But Pastor Williams had taught him better. "Marcus's family doesn't need pity," Jordan said firmly. "They need support. They need a community that will walk through this challenge with them. If you want to help, don't just send money. Get involved with your own community. Find the Mount Sinai in your neighborhood and become part of it." "But what about the medical bills?" a reporter pressed. "That's being handled," Jordan said simply. He didn't mention that he'd already spoken with Dr. Kim about arranging for the best specialists and covering all costs. Some help should be given quietly, without fanfare. "Are you planning to retire from basketball?" someone called out. Jordan paused. He hadn't planned to address this question yet, but the moment felt right. "I will finish this season with the Chicago Bulls," he said. "We're going to win another championship, and I'm going to play every game like it matters. But when the season ends, I'm going to focus on learning how to serve this community better." The reporters exploded with follow-up questions, but Jordan was done. He turned and walked up the church steps, where Pastor Williams was waiting with a small smile. "That was well said," the pastor told him quietly. "Was it too much?" "I didn't want to make things harder for the church." "You honored this community with your words," Pastor Williams replied, "and you honored yourself by telling the truth." Inside the sanctuary, church members were arriving for Sunday service. Word had spread quickly through the neighborhood about the shooting and about Jordan's public statement. Instead of the usual 200 people, nearly 400 crowded into the small church. Some were regular members who wanted to show support for the Thompson family. Others were neighbors who rarely attended church but felt drawn by the crisis. A few were reporters who had taken Pastor Williams up on his offer to attend service. Jordan took his usual seat in the back row, but today felt completely different. Everyone knew who he was now. Children turned to stare at him. Adults whispered and pointed. The peaceful anonymity he'd enjoyed for a week was gone forever. As the service began, Jordan worried that his presence might become a distraction. But something remarkable happened. Mrs. Gladys Washington sat down at the old piano and began playing Precious Lord, a hymn that spoke of finding strength in difficult times. The choir joined in, and soon the entire congregation was singing together. The music filled the sanctuary with something more powerful than celebrity curiosity. It filled the room with shared faith and community strength. Jordan felt the same peace he'd experienced the previous Sunday despite all the attention. Pastor Williams stepped to the pulpit and looked out at the packed sanctuary. He didn't mention the media circus outside or acknowledge Jordan's presence. Instead, he spoke directly to his community's hearts. "Today we gather with heavy hearts," he began. "One of our young people is fighting for his life. One of our families is facing challenges that seem impossible to bear. This is a time when our faith is tested." He talked about the story of Job, who faced terrible losses but never lost his trust in God's goodness. He spoke about how communities grow stronger through shared struggles, not weaker. "We don't know why bad things happen to good people," Pastor Williams said. "We don't know why a boy who was doing everything right had to suffer. But we know this: Marcus Thompson is not walking through this valley alone. He has a family that loves him. He has a community that will support him. And he has a God who will never abandon him." The congregation responded with amens and nods of agreement. Jordan noticed that many people were crying, not just for Marcus, but for their own struggles and those of their neighbors. During prayer time, people stood throughout the sanctuary to share their hearts. Mrs. Patterson asked for prayers for her grandson overseas and for the Thompson family. Mr. Rodriguez requested prayers for his wife's cancer treatment. Young Keisha Davis asked the church to pray for all the children in the neighborhood who were afraid to walk to school. Then something unexpected happened. Marcus Thompson Sr. stood up in the third row. "I want to thank everyone for the love you've shown my family," he said, his voice shaking with emotion. "My grandson is going to have a long road ahead of him. But looking around this room today, I know he's not going to walk that road alone." The congregation erupted in applause and calls of "We love you" and "We're here for you." Jordan watched Mr. Thompson's face and saw something beautiful. A man who was choosing hope over despair, community over isolation. After the service, Jordan expected people to crowd around him seeking autographs or photos. Instead, something different happened. The congregation surrounded the Thompson family with hugs and promises of help. People offered to drive to medical appointments, bring meals, help with childcare for Marcus's younger sister. Church members did approach Jordan, but not as fans. They greeted him as family. "Thank you for what you said outside," Mrs. Anderson told him. "You helped people understand what we already know. This is a special place. Thank you for being with us last night," added Carlos Martinez, the young veteran. "Having you there meant everything to the family." Mother Jefferson, despite being 85 years old and still recovering from hip surgery, made her way over Jordan with the help of her walking cane. "Young man," she said, looking up at him with eyes full of wisdom, "you found what you were looking for, didn't you?" "Yes, ma'am," Jordan replied. "I think I did." "Good. Now the real work begins. Fame brought you here, but character will keep you here. This community will test you in ways basketball never could." As people began leaving the church, Jordan noticed reporters still waiting outside with their cameras. He realized his life would never be the same. The peaceful anonymity he'd enjoyed for a week was gone. Every move he made would be watched and analyzed. But looking around at the faces of his new family, Pastor Williams, Mrs. Anderson, Mr. Thompson, Mother Jefferson, and dozens of others, Jordan realized he didn't want his old life back. This community had given him something no championship ever could: a sense of purpose that went deeper than personal achievement. Outside, one last reporter called out, "Michael, what's next for you?" Jordan paused at the top of the church steps and looked back at the building that had changed his life. Through the windows, he could see people cleaning up after service, rearranging chairs, and preparing for the evening youth program. Normal people doing ordinary things that made their community stronger. "What's next?" Jordan said simply, "is learning how to be the man this community has taught me I can become." As he walked to his car, Jordan felt the weight of his decisions settling on his shoulders. He just publicly committed to a path that would change everything about his life. The basketball world would be shocked. His agents and sponsors would panic. The media would follow his every move. But for the first time in years, Jordan felt completely at peace with who he was and where he was going. He'd found his purpose, and it was bigger than any game he'd ever played. The real question now was whether he'd have the courage to live up to the commitment he just made to the world. 3 weeks after Jordan's public statement at Mount Sinai, the Chicago Bulls found themselves in Game 6 of the NBA Finals against the Utah Jazz. The series was tied 3-3, and tonight would determine who won the championship. For most of Jordan's career, this would have been the only thing on his mind. Tonight felt completely different. In the weeks since Marcus Thompson's shooting, Jordan had continued his morning volunteer work at the church while playing basketball at the highest level. The schedule was exhausting, but it kept him grounded. Every morning reminded him what really mattered. Marcus was making progress in his recovery, though slowly. The bullet had damaged his spinal cord severely, and Dodds confirmed he would never walk again. But the 12-year-old's spirit remained strong, inspired by the community that surrounded him with love and support. The Thompson family had moved into a small apartment that the church helped make wheelchair accessible. Jordan had quietly arranged for the best medical care and equipment, but the real healing came from neighbors who brought meals, friends who visited daily, and a community that refused to let the family face their challenges alone. Tonight, Marcus would be watching the game from his hospital room during one of his rehabilitation sessions. Pastor Williams had organized a viewing party at Mount Sinai, where dozens of church members would gather to support their newest family member. In the Bulls' locker room before the game, Jordan's teammates noticed something different about him. He was focused and determined as always. But there was a calmness they hadn't seen before. The desperate hunger that had driven him for years had been replaced by something deeper. "You ready for this?" Scottie Pippen asked as they prepared to take the court. "I'm ready," Jordan replied. But he wasn't thinking about himself. He was thinking about Marcus Thompson, who would never play basketball again but still cheered for his favorite team. He was thinking about Miss Anderson, who worked 2 jobs to support her grandchildren but never missed a Bulls game on her old TV. He was thinking about everyone at Mount Sinai who had taught him that winning meant more than just beating your opponent. The United Center was packed with nearly 20,000 screaming fans. During pre-game introductions, Jordan noticed a section of seats near midcourt filled with people wearing Mount Sinai Baptist Church t-shirts. Pastor Williams was there with his wife Janet. Mr. and Miss Thompson sat next to them, having come straight from visiting Marcus at the hospital. Mother Jefferson was in her wheelchair in a special viewing area, refusing to miss what she called our boys' big game. But it was the empty wheelchair next to the Thompson family that hit Jordan hardest. That was Marcus's seat, the place where he should have been cheering with his family. Instead, he was in a rehabilitation center, learning how to live with a disability that would change his life forever. The game started terribly for the Bulls. Utah came out aggressive and focused, building an early lead that grew throughout the first half. Jordan was having an off night, missing shots he normally made easily. His passes were sloppy, his timing off. By halftime, the Jazz led 53. In the locker room, Coach Phil Jackson could see that Jordan was distracted. The other players were frustrated. This was their chance at another championship, and their leader seemed disconnected. "What's going on out there?" Pippen asked Jordan directly. "You're playing like your mind is somewhere else." Jordan looked around at his teammates, men he'd won 5 championships with, players who had followed his lead through countless battles. They deserved his best effort, especially tonight. "You're right," Jordan said. "My mind has been somewhere else, but not in a bad way." He told them about Marcus Thompson, about the Mount Sinai community, about what he'd learned over the past few weeks. His teammates listened with growing understanding. "I used to think winning was about proving I was better than everyone else," Jordan continued. "But I've learned something different. Real winning is about lifting other people up with you. Tonight, I'm not just playing for us. I'm playing for a kid who will never play basketball again, but still believes in the power of never giving up." The team looked at Jordan with new respect. This wasn't the selfish superstar they'd sometimes struggled with. This was a leader who had found something bigger than his own ambition. "Let's go win this thing," Dennis Rodman said, for Marcus. The third quarter transformed the game. Jordan started playing with a purpose his teammates had never seen before. Not the desperate hunger of someone trying to prove himself, but the steady determination of someone playing for people he loved. He scored 15 points in the quarter, but more importantly, he made his teammates better. He found Pippen for easy baskets, set screens for Steve Kerr's three-pointers, and encouraged everyone to play their best basketball. With each basket, Jordan looked up at the Mount Sinai section. Pastor Williams was on his feet, cheering like he was at church. Mrs. Thompson was crying tears of joy. Mother Jefferson was waving her handkerchief and shouting encouragement. By the end of the third quarter, the Bulls had cut the lead to 70. The fourth quarter became legendary, though not for the reasons Jordan expected. With 5 minutes left, he stole the ball from Utah's Karl Malone and scored to tie the game 83-83. The crowd erupted, but Jordan felt strangely calm. With 2 minutes remaining, Utah took a 3-point lead. Most of Jordan's career, this would triggered his famous competitive fire, the intense determination to prove he was the best player on the court. Tonight he felt something different. He thought about Marcus Thompson learning to navigate life from a wheelchair with incredible courage. He thought about Mr. Thompson volunteering with youth programs, despite being unemployed. He thought about Mrs. Anderson raising 3 grandchildren with grace and dignity. These people faced challenges that made basketball seem easy, and they did it without complaint or self-pity. If they could show that kind of strength, Jordan could certainly play basketball with everything he had. With 37 seconds left, Jordan hit the shot that won the championship. A fadeaway jumper over Utah's Brian Russell that seemed to hang in the air forever. As the ball swished through the net, giving the Bulls an 87-86 lead, Jordan didn't celebrate the way he usually did. Instead of pumping his fists or screaming with joy, he looked directly at the Mount Sinai section. He pointed toward Marcus's empty wheelchair and mouthed the words, "This is for you, buddy." When the final buzzer sounded, Jordan's teammates surrounded him in celebration. The crowd went wild. Confetti fell from the ceiling, but Jordan's eyes were fixed on Pastor Williams, who was clapping with tears streaming down his face. During the championship trophy ceremony, reporters asked Jordan about his gesture toward Marcus Thompson's seat. Marcus Thompson is 12 years old, and he's facing challenges that make winning a basketball game look easy, Jordan said into the microphones. He's teaching me and everyone who knows him what real courage looks like. This championship belongs to him and to everyone at Mount Sinai who shows me every day what it means to be strong. The next morning, Jordan visited Marcus at the rehabilitation center and brought him the championship trophy. They spent an hour together, with Jordan asking Marcus about his recovery and his dreams for the future. "Mr. Jordan," Marcus said as they sat together in the hospital's family room, "I want to become a doctor someday. I want to help other kids who get hurt like I did." "That's a great dream, Marcus, and I believe you can do it. Will you help me? Not with money or anything like that. But will you be there when it gets hard? Like family?" Jordan felt his eyes fill with tears. This brave kid wasn't asking for anything except friendship and support. The same things the Mount Sinai community had given Jordan when he needed it most. "Yes," Jordan said, "I'll be there." That's what family does. 6 months later, Jordan made good on another promise he'd made that day at Mount Sinai. He held a press conference that stunned the basketball world, but the people who knew him best weren't surprised at all. Standing at a podium with Pastor Williams beside him, Jordan announced his retirement from basketball. But more shocking than his retirement was what he planned to do next. "Today I'm announcing the launch of the James Jordan Foundation," he said, "named after my father, who taught me that success isn't measured by what you achieve for yourself, but by what you help others achieve." The foundation would work with communities like Mount Sinai to provide educational opportunities, support for families in crisis, and programs for young people facing challenges. Jordan would be personally involved, not just writing checks, but working directly with the communities the foundation served. "My father always told me that real strength comes from lifting others up," Jordan continued. "The people at Mount Sinai Baptist Church taught me how to do that. Now I want to spend my life helping other communities discover the same kind of strength and hope I found there." The reporters were shocked. The most competitive athlete in the world was walking away from basketball to become a community organizer and philanthropist. But in the Mount Sinai section of the press conference, Jordan's church family was beaming with pride. They weren't surprised that their Mike had chosen service over celebrity. They'd been watching him learn these lessons for months. After the press conference, Jordan joined the Mount Sinai family for their regular Wednesday evening community dinner. He helped serve food, cleaned tables, and talked with children about their dreams. Just like he had every week since that first Sunday when he'd sat in the back pew crying and lost. "You found what you were looking for," Pastor Williams said as they cleaned up together after dinner. "Actually," Jordan replied, "I found something better. I found out that what I was looking for was inside me all along. I just needed the right people to help me see it." As Jordan drove home that night, he thought about the journey that had brought him to this moment. From the emptiness of success without meaning to the fullness of purpose found in community. From trying to be everyone's hero, to learning how to be one person's friend. Tomorrow he would begin the next chapter of his life. Not as Michael Jordan the basketball player, but as Mike the community servant. It would be harder than basketball in many ways, with no scoreboards to measure success, and no crowds to cheer his achievements. But Jordan had learned something more valuable than any championship ring. Real victory wasn't about rising above others, but about lifting others up with you. And that was a game he planned to play for the rest of his life. 2 years later, on a crisp October morning in 2000, Michael Jordan walked through the doors of Mount Sinai Baptist Church carrying a worn leather briefcase and wearing a simple gray suit. The media attention had finally died down. The shock of his retirement had faded. The world had moved on to new sports heroes and different stories. But Jordan kept returning to this place every Sunday. Not because cameras were watching or reporters were asking questions, but because this small church on Chicago's South Side had become his true home. The sanctuary looked exactly the same as it had that first morning when he'd sat in the back pew, lost and crying. The same wooden benches, the same cream-colored walls, the same tall windows letting in golden streams of sunlight. Miss Ladis Washington still played the old piano, her arthritic hands creating music that touched hearts throughout the neighborhood. But Jordan was completely different than the man who had first walked through these doors. The desperate hunger for fame and achievement had been replaced by something deeper and more lasting. The quiet satisfaction of purpose, lived daily. The James Jordan Foundation had grown beyond anything Jordan had imagined when he first announced it. Starting with Mount Sinai as its first partner, the foundation now worked with 43 communities across the country. They provided after-school programs, job training for adults, support for families facing medical crises, and scholarships for young people who showed promise but lacked opportunity. Jordan wasn't just a figurehead who wrote checks and posed for photos. He worked directly with communities, spending weeks at a time in different cities, learning about local challenges and helping develop solutions that came from within each neighborhood rather than being imposed from outside. The briefcase he carried contained reports from foundation programs, letters from families who had been helped, and photos from recent community events. But most importantly, it held a handwritten letter from Marcus Thompson that had arrived the day before. Marcus was now 14 and thriving despite his disability. The quiet, shy boy who had loved basketball was becoming a confident young man with ambitious dreams. He'd maintained excellent grades throughout his recovery and was already taking advanced science classes in preparation for his goal of becoming a doctor. But it wasn't just Marcus's academic success that made Jordan proud. The teenager had become a leader in his own right, mentoring younger kids who faced disabilities and showing them that their limitations didn't define their possibilities. Marcus's letter described his latest project, organizing a wheelchair basketball league for children at the rehabilitation center where he'd spent months learning to walk again. He'd convinced the hospital administration to donate court time and had recruited volunteer coaches from the community. "Mr. Jordan," the letter read in Marcus's careful handwriting, "I wanted you to know that I'm finally understanding what you meant when you said real strength comes from helping others. These kids look up to me the same way I looked up to you. It feels good to be someone's hero, but not because I'm better than them. Because I can show them they're stronger than they know." Jordan read that letter 3 times before putting it in his briefcase. Marcus had learned in 2 years what it had taken Jordan decades to understand, that true greatness wasn't about rising above others, but about lifting others up with you. As Jordan took his usual seat in the third pew, he'd gradually moved closer to the front over the past 2 years. He looked around at the familiar faces that had become his extended family. Mrs. Anderson was there with her 3 grandchildren, who were now teenagers themselves. The oldest, Marcus Jr., named after Marcus Thompson, was starting his senior year of high school with a full scholarship to Northwestern University. Mr. Thompson sat with his wife in their regular spot, having found steady work as a maintenance supervisor at a downtown office building. The job came through connections made at Mount Sinai. A church member who owned a cleaning company had recommended him for the position. It was another example of how this community took care of its own. Mother Jefferson, now 87, was still cooking for the Wednesday evening dinners, despite her family's gentle protests that she should slow down. She moved more carefully now, with a walker instead of just a cane, but her spirit remained as strong as ever. Pastor Williams looked older too, with more gray in his hair and deeper lines around his eyes. Leading a community through challenges like violence, poverty, and loss aged a person quickly. But there was also a lightness about him that hadn't been there 2 years ago. The partnership with Jordan's foundation had brought resources and opportunities to Mount Sinai that had transformed what they could offer their neighborhood. The church itself had been renovated with foundation support, though carefully and respectfully. The old piano had been restored to its original beauty. The building's heating system had been replaced. A new community center had been built next door, providing space for after-school programs, job training classes, and community meetings. But the most important changes weren't in the building. They were in the people. Jordan watched children who had been shy and struggling 2 years ago now confident and thriving. He saw adults who had been unemployed now working in jobs that provided dignity and stability. He witnessed teenagers who might have been drawn to street life instead focused on education and positive goals. Not every story was a success. The neighborhood still faced challenges that one church and one foundation couldn't solve complete. Violence still occurred, though less frequently. Poverty still affected many families, though with more support systems available. Some young people still made bad choices despite having good alternatives. Jordan had learned to accept that he couldn't save everyone. But Pastor Williams had taught him something more important. He didn't need to save everyone to make a difference. Sometimes changing one life changed everything for that person's family, friends, and community. As the service began, Jordan noticed something that always filled him with quiet pride. Scattered throughout the congregation were people whose lives had been touched by foundation programs. Former scholarship recipients who were now college graduates working in their communities, parents who had found jobs through training programs and were building better lives for their children, elderly residents who felt safer and less isolated because of neighborhood support networks. These weren't dramatic rescue stories that would make headlines. They were quiet transformations that happened one person at a time, one family at a time, one community at a time. Pastor Williams stepped to the pulpit and smiled at his congregation. "Before we begin today's service," he said, "I want to share some wonderful news. Our brother Marcus Thompson has been accepted into the pre-med program at the University of Chicago with a full scholarship." The congregation erupted in applause and cheers. Jordan felt tears in his eyes as he thought about the frightened 12-year-old boy who had been shot while walking home from the library. That boy had grown into a young man whose courage and determination inspired everyone who knew him. Marcus wanted to be here today to thank everyone personally. Pastor Williams continued, but he's at the hospital volunteering with the children's wheelchair basketball program he started. He said to tell you that he's learned something important. The best way to heal from your own pain is to help others heal from theirs. More applause and amens filled the sanctuary. Jordan thought about how perfectly Marcus had captured what the Mount Sinai community had taught them both. During the sermon, Pastor Williams talked about the parable of the mustard seed. How the smallest seed grows into the largest tree, providing shelter and sustenance for many. He connected it to their community's growth over the past 2 years. 2 years ago, we thought we were just a small church trying to help our neighbors. Pastor Williams said, "We didn't realize we were planting seeds that would grow into something much larger. Today, through partnerships and programs we never imagined possible, we're helping communities across the country discover what we've always known, that real strength comes from taking care of each other." Jordan knew Pastor Williams was referring to the foundation's work, but the pastor was careful never to single out Jordan for special recognition. Here at Mount Sinai, Jordan wasn't treated as a celebrity or savior. He was simply Mike, a member of the family who happened to have resources that could help the community achieve its goals. After the service, Jordan joined the usual crowd gathering for coffee and conversation in the fellowship hall. These informal discussions had become some of his favorite parts of Sunday morning. No agenda, no schedule, just people talking about their lives, their challenges, their hopes. Sarah Chen, now 14 and visiting her grandmother from California, approached Jordan with a shy smile. She was the girl who had first talked to him that morning 2 years ago, when he'd been crying in the back pew. "Mr. Jordan," she said, "I wanted to thank you for something." "What's that, Sarah?" "For showing me that heroes aren't people who never need help. Heroes are people who help others even when they need help themselves." Jordan knelt down to her level, remembering the brave 12-year-old who had decided to comfort a crying stranger. "Sarah, you taught me something that day too. You showed me that kindness doesn't require permission or qualifications. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is just ask someone if they're okay." "Are you okay now?" she asked, echoing her question from 2 years before. Jordan looked around the fellowship hall at the faces of people who had become his chosen family. Mrs. Anderson was helping serve coffee while her grandchildren played with younger kids. Mr. Thompson was deep in conversation with other men about organizing a neighborhood watch program. Mother Jefferson was holding court at a corner table, sharing wisdom with anyone who would listen. Pastor Williams was moving through the crowd, checking on church members, listening to their concerns, offering quiet counsel and support. This was his calling, not to be a famous preacher or build a mega church, but to serve this specific community with faithfulness and love. Jordan thought about his own calling, discovered in this very building through the patient guidance of people who had seen his potential for service, even when he couldn't see it himself. "Yes, Sarah," he said, "I'm more than okay. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." As the afternoon wound down, Jordan helped clean up the fellowship hall and prepare for the evening youth program. It was ordinary work, stacking chairs, washing coffee cups, sweeping floors. But it was work that connected him to something larger than himself. Walking to his car as the sun set over Chicago, Jordan reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. From the desperate emptiness of fame without purpose to the deep satisfaction of service with meaning. From trying to be everyone's hero to learning how to be one person's friend. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. It had taken months of patient work, guided by Pastor Williams and supported by a community that had faith in his potential for growth. There had been setbacks and mistakes, moments when Jordan had slipped back into old patterns of thinking about himself as separate from and above others. But gradually, steadily, he had learned what his father had tried to teach him years earlier. That success wasn't measured by what you achieved for yourself, but by what you helped others achieve. Tomorrow, Jordan would fly to Detroit to visit another foundation partner community. Next week, he would testify before Congress about the importance of community-based programs for at-risk youth. Next month, he would speak at a conference of religious leaders about faith-based community development. These weren't activities that brought him the adrenaline rush of athletic competition or the instant gratification of crowd approval. They were quieter forms of service that required patience, humility, and the willingness to work behind the scenes for long-term change. But Jordan had discovered something more valuable than any championship ring or MVP award. The deep satisfaction that came from using his gifts and resources to help others discover and develop their own potential. As he drove through the neighborhoods around Mount Sinai, Jordan saw the changes that 2 years of sustained community investment had made. New businesses owned by local residents, playgrounds that were safe and well-maintained, young people walking with purpose rather than aimlessly hanging around corners. The problems hadn't disappeared completely. Poverty, violence, and lack of opportunities still affected too many families. But hope had taken root in ways that were visible to anyone who looked carefully. Jordan pulled into his driveway and sat in his car for a moment, looking at the house that no longer felt like a fortress separating him from the world. Regular visits from his Mount Sinai family had transformed it into a place of hospitality and connection. His phone buzzed with a text message from Marcus Thompson. "Mr. Jordan, thank you for believing in me when I couldn't believe in myself. See you at the wheelchair basketball tournament next weekend. These kids are going to love meeting you. Not because you're famous, but because you're family." Jordan smiled and put his phone away. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities to serve. There would be foundations to manage, communities to visit, young people to mentor, and problems to solve. But tonight, he would go to sleep thinking about Marcus Thompson's courage, Mrs. Anderson's grace, Pastor Williams' wisdom, and Sarah Chen's kindness. He would rest in the knowledge that he was part of something bigger than himself, a community of people committed to lifting each other up. And in the morning, he would wake up ready to play the most important game of his life, the never-ending contest of turning individual success into collective strength, personal achievement to community empowerment, and fame into service. It was a game with no final buzzer, no championship trophy, and no Hall of Fame. But it was also a game where everyone could win, where the score was measured in lives changed rather than points scored, and where the greatest victory was helping others discover their own capacity for greatness. Jordan had finally found what he'd been searching for that day when he first walked into Mount Sinai Baptist Church. Not just faith in God, but faith in the power of community to transform lives, including his own. The little girl who had asked if he was okay 2 years ago had her answer. Michael Jordan was more than okay. He was home. The little girl who asked, "Are you okay?" changed the life of the most famous athlete in the world, simply by caring about a stranger. Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness create the biggest transformations. We'd love to know, where are you listening from today? Drop a comment and let us know your city or country. It's amazing how stories like this can bring people together from all around the world. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for many more inspiring stories like this one. We share real tales of courage, kindness, and transformation that remind us what's truly important in life. Most importantly, please share this video with your friends and family. In a world that often focuses on fame and success, we all need reminders that the greatest victories come from lifting others up. Help us spread kindness and awareness, one story at a time. Thank you for listening, and remember, you never know how a simple act of kindness might change someone's entire life. See you in the next story.